Protests growing in Minnesota over the woman killed by an ICE officer. The White House rushing to the officer's defense. Democratic Senator Adam Schiff joins the Takeout to talk about the ICE shooting and about new moves to limit Trump's war powers in Venezuela. And Mayor Mamdani, his appointments that have startled the city, and today, new details on his child care plan. Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in for Major Garrett. Welcome to the Takeout. Tensions over the killing of a Minneapolis woman by an ICE officer are growing by the minute, and now a debate over whether this disturbing video shows a wrongful shooting is playing out in public, with the White House squaring off against Minnesota leaders. In the video, you can clearly see the ICE officer fire his weapon. But was he under threat from the woman and her car? Did he follow law enforcement protocols? The Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, has repeatedly called Renee Good, the woman seen here who was killed, a, quote, domestic terrorist, though we're still waiting for evidence of that. Today, Vice President J.D. Vance said this.
You have a woman who aimed her car at a law enforcement officer and pressed on the accelerator. Nobody debates that. This was an attack on federal law enforcement. This was an attack on law and order. This was an attack on the American people. The way that the media, by and large, has reported this story has been an absolute disgrace, and it puts our law enforcement officers at risk every single day.
Minnesota leaders say the administration is rushing to place blame even before a full investigation has been conducted.
It feels very difficult that we will get a fair outcome. And I say that only because people in positions of power have already passed judgment, from the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem, have stood and told you things that are verifiably false.
Tonight, there are protesters in the streets of the city lashing out over not just the shooting, but also over the presence of 1,500 ICE officers there. A lot to cover. We're going to begin our coverage tonight with Nicole Saganga, who has been on the ground since the shooting happened. Nicole, good to see you. What are we learning today about both the ICE officer and about the woman who was killed?
Yeah, CBS News has learned that the ICE agent involved in this fatal shooting was a member of ICE's immigration task force, a special response team, and was an over 10-year veteran of ICE. Now, special response teams are given very advanced training. This is an agent who would have received over 280 hours of training in any given year. In addition to that, we know that this particular ICE agent last summer nearby St. Paul had been dragged by a suspect in a car ramming incident during an attempted arrest. Went on to federal court there. We have seen the images in court documents. And while, this case is barely 24 hours old, we're also learning a little bit more about Renee Good. She was a 37-year-old woman. She was the mother of a 6-year-old child. Neighbors describe her as being kind-hearted. Law enforcement told us that there is no indication that she was the target of any law enforcement operation. But we're still learning a little bit more about who she was. We also know that her partner was at the scene at the time of the incident.
Have we gotten any indication yet, Nicole, that she was anything that could be characterized as a domestic terrorist or a left-wing radical, as she's been described by members of the administration?
Yeah, I've been talking to law enforcement sources all day, Nancy. There is no indication at this time that this individual was anyone who can be explicitly tied to domestic terrorism or was a quote-unquote left-wing radical. We know that officers had asked, Renee Good to get out of her vehicle, and that she did not abide by those orders, instead pulling away. But that's the extent right now. And one thing that has been pointed out to me by several ICE officials, including I spoke to a former DHS counsel today, a former acting ICE director, the former director of HSI. All of them told me that what the Department of Homeland Security is doing right now, what DHS Secretary Kristi Noem is doing by coming out and saying definitively that this individual was a domestic terrorist, is actually undermining the credibility of this investigation. And we should point out that in cases like this, Nancy, state and federal agencies usually work through this investigative process together. And today, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension says that they were informed by the FBI that the U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't wish to include them in the investigation. All of this further undermining and sowing doubts that this will truly be a transparent investigation. We reached out to the Department of Justice to ask them if they plan to release their findings. We're still waiting to hear back.
Lots of tension appears to be building between federal officials and state officials in Minnesota. Nicole Saganga with all that great reporting. Thank you so much. I want to bring in retired FBI Executive Assistant Director Chris Pihota. He served in the Bureau for more than 20 years. Chris, I'm so glad you're with us because I'm hoping you can help break down what we can see, what we don't see in this video. When you look at it, what are your thoughts when it comes to the actions of the agent who fired his weapon and the agents around him?
Well, glad to be with you today and glad to contribute to the conversation. What I'd like to do is paint a picture, first of all, that the ICE agents were operating in what they see as a hostile area with a lot of protests and a lot of folks following them around, acting in ways that are impeding their progress, that are possibly provocative or confrontational. So that sets the stage for the mindset of the ICE agents. In this instance, they were moving and their progress was impeded by that vehicle that was sitting crosswise in the road. They stopped their movement. They got out, confronted the driver. The driver then, for whatever reason, accelerated, tried to leave the scene very rapidly, reportedly struck one of the ICE agents and then was fired upon with lethal force, and car comes to rest further down the road.
I'm not sure that we see her actually strike an officer. Is your understanding that she did?
It was reported that one of them. Yeah, it was reported that one of them was struck in some fashion by the car. I don't know what the extent of the injuries were, but I don't know if he got clipped by the rearview mirror, whatever. But the car hit one of them, and then the one agent fired on the vehicle. And what I would tell people also is, as the training goes, motor vehicles are considered deadly weapons when used as ramming implements. So when they saw the vehicle moving, they made that quick one split second assumption that she's trying to get away, she may ram into us, and the agent, in accordance with the deadly force policies that they operate under, was able to fire into the vehicle. He felt that there was imminent death or serious bodily harm for himself or others around him, and that's what ended in the tragic situation we have here. And I think it was avoidable on several levels, but we had this convergence of activity, and a young woman lost her life.
How do you think it would have been avoidable on the part of law enforcement? What could they have done differently?
They could have stepped back a little bit. They could have allowed her to leave. They could have engaged in more of a, I hate to use the word friendly, but maybe less confrontational dialogue with her. She may have gotten scared. She may have had the same adrenaline response that the officer had who fired his weapon. So lots of what ifs in this situation. I also believe that maybe if she wouldn't have blocked the road and impeded their progress, you can protest, but do so from a safe distance. And again, there's going to be a lot of what ifs, maybes, and could have, would have type of situations discussed.
Yeah, this investigation is really in its infancy. There are a couple of things that people keep asking about after watching the videos. One, that there was a man on the scene who identified himself as a doctor, but was turned away by the officers on the scene who told him it was a crime scene, so he couldn't enter. Also, the agent involved appeared to drive away from the scene a few minutes after the shooting, which wouldn't seem to be standard operating procedure during an active investigation, right? What's your take on both of those aspects of what went down?
I'm not aware of the person identifying themselves as a doctor. I know people tried to render aid and they were turned away from the scene by the ICE agents. A lot of that is standard protocol so that can be preserved. If she was already presumed deceased, they will preserve the crime scene. If she is still alive, they would have rendered aid. So it could have been a judgment call on site from the law enforcement folks. As far as
The agent
the whole
driving
situation,
away. Yeah.
yeah, the whole situation was charged with emotion, adrenaline, and I don't know why that agent departed the scene. Generally, you would remain on site till supervision arrived, and then they would begin an investigative protocol, and then he would have been notified of his duties and responsibilities from that point on.
Well, Chris Pajota, former official with the FBI, really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
No, thank you. Pleasure.
President Trump was quick to defend the ICE officer involved in the shooting. He called the victim a, quote, professional agitator. We're going to turn now to our Ed O'Keefe, who is at the White House. Ed, good to see you there on the North Lawn. The White House really leaned in today to this argument that the woman in the car was to blame, not ICE agents. What can you tell us about the message and the strategy here?
Yeah, well, and it was especially Vice President Vance who came to the White House briefing room to denounce coverage of the aftermath of this, especially the focus and the scrutiny on the ICE officer involved. And then, yes, as you suggested, the president first picked up on that by arguing that she was part of this organized left-wing or left-leaning movement to discredit or to impede the ongoing work of ICE and other federal agencies to enforce immigration law. Normally, the goal, the hope, is that administration officials come to the briefing room to convey information. Occasionally, and this happens in all presidencies, they come to lecture us. And that's what the vice president did today. Take a listen.
She was trying to ram this guy with her car. He shot back. He defended himself. He's already been seriously wounded in law enforcement operations before, and everybody who's been repeating the lie that this is some innocent woman who was out for a drive in Minneapolis when a law enforcement officer shot at her, you should be ashamed of yourselves.
Part of what the vice president also did today is announce that the Justice Department is set to hire essentially a special counsel or an inspector general, someone he kept referring to as an AAG or assistant attorney general, to investigate all those allegations of fraud across the state of Minnesota, a position, a mandate that's likely to expand to other states, as the White House intends to spend much of this campaign year focusing on alleged fraud, especially in Democratic-controlled states, to try to raise questions about their leadership and about the use of federal dollars to fund social programs across the country. This was the most high-profile and certainly pretty vociferous appearance of the vice president in recent days, amid, of course, all the focus on what's going on in Venezuela and what could happen one day soon in Greenland.
And I want to shift to Venezuela. The president told the New York Times that the U.S. oversight of that country could last for years. That was an eye-opening comment. Did he say why it would last so long and what that would look like?
Well, he suggested certainly that there aren't going to be elections anytime soon, and once again didn't firmly commit to supporting the opposition party that had won elections in 2024, suggesting that so far at least the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, is doing what the U.S. wants. We're going to get some sense of what the U.S. engagement in extracting Venezuela's oil is going to look like, most likely, after a meeting tomorrow here at the White House that the president, the Treasury Secretary, the Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, and the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, are set to have with executives from Halliburton, Chevron, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, Valero, Marathon, and Continental. Those are all either companies that are extracting oil from Venezuela right now, companies that could, or the sort of oil infrastructure companies that could conceivably one day help them do that work.
Ed O'Keefe, that'll be a meeting to watch. Thank you so much. The House is poised to pass a 3-year extension of Affordable Care Act subsidies. The measure has received bipartisan support in the lower chamber, but meanwhile, a different proposal is making its way around the Senate. Caitlin Huey-Burns is following all of this from Capitol Hill. Caitlin, good to see you. This issue has been such a big bone of contention between Democrats and Republicans. Can you walk us through this proposal and why it got the needed support?
Hey, Nancy, great to see you. Well, this is a vote that House Speaker Mike Johnson never wanted to have. And yet, right now, as we speak, there are a number of Republicans voting in support of this 3-year extension to those enhanced Obamacare subsidies. Now, this was something that was forced upon the speaker through a discharge petition. Remember, late last year, before the holidays, a number of Republicans bucked their own party leadership and said that they would support a petition by Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries to force a vote on the House floor. And so that's what we are seeing now. And Nancy, it's interesting because I've talked to a number of these Republicans supporting this measure, and they say that they don't necessarily support a 3-year extension of those Obamacare subsidies. But what they do hope is that this sends a message that something needs to be done to address the rising costs of health care. Remember, those enhanced tax credits already expired. People's premiums have already gone up. And there are a number of battleground lawmakers from battleground districts who are concerned about this issue. And you even heard the president himself tell House Republicans earlier this week at a conference for their conference to say that health care is going to be a big issue in this midterm elections and Republicans need to own it. So what happens next is they have this vote. It's not going to be taken up in the Senate, but there is a small bipartisan group of lawmakers in the Senate working with House members to try to figure out a way to address the rising costs of health care. There's a framework of a plan right now that includes a small 2-year extension of those Obamacare subsidies while also working in other reforms. They're hoping to get text out later next week at some point, but still a long way to go before anything related to health care becomes law.
Yeah, millions of Americans hoping that Congress can figure out some kind of compromise. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much. Still to come on the Takeout, California Senator Adam Schiff, his views on the ICE shooting and U.S. military actions in Venezuela. Also, Zohran Mamdani, 1 week onto the job. We'll look at his childcare plan and some of the most headline-grabbing moves so far. Plus, a doctor's orders to eat your ice cream. My conversation with Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel on his new book, which says to do just that. I'm serious. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. With bipartisan approval, the Senate advanced a measure today that would restrict President Trump from using more military force against Venezuela unless he gets approval from Congress. Joining me now is one of the authors of the bill, California Democratic Senator Adam Schiff. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. This was a major development. You tried to do something like this before. It did not pass. Now it has 5 Republican votes. What do you think the trigger was that led them to vote yes?
I think it was a couple of things. I think first, this began as a campaign that the administration claimed was about stopping drug-running boats, but it became very clear in the aftermath of this military operation that this was really about oil. If this were just about drug running or it were just about the apprehension of a fugitive, Nicolas Maduro, and bringing him to justice, then the bringing to justice would have ended when he showed up in the courtroom. It would not have required us to essentially commit to running another country for the indefinite future or seizing its oil. So I think that the circumstances have changed. The president also in his statements talking about a long-term continuing role in running another country also, I think, raises the alarm bells significantly for Democrats and for Republicans. So that has broadened the support for our resolution.
Do you think this measure has a chance of passing in the House? And the president called it stupid today. It's highly unlikely that he would sign it. So what is the value of going through this exercise if at the end of the day he's not going to get on board?
Well, first of all, this is going to force a real debate on the Senate floor. This essentially brings to the floor the body of the resolution, brings out from the classified spaces where all of the oversight has been done to the degree it has been done at all. Not a single committee has had a public hearing on this. Armed Services hasn't, Foreign Affairs hasn't, the Judiciary Committee hasn't. So we're now going to have a fulsome debate. If the administration believes that it is worth risking the lives of American service members to secure the oil resources of another country, then let them make the case for that and let us put that to a vote. So it's going to spark an important debate in the Senate. I hope it will force a vote in the House. I think it has a very good chance of passing in the House as well. And yes, the president will probably veto it, but does it still matter that Congress goes on the record in a bipartisan way rejecting this use of force? It does matter, and you can tell how much it matters by the immediacy and the vehemency with which the president has now threatened Republican members who voted for it.
The president is getting a lot of attention for something he said to the New York Times. You just touched on it. He said that his oversight of Venezuela could last for years. How do you interpret those comments, and do you think that that should require congressional approval as well?
It absolutely should require congressional approval because, let's face it, there's not going to be a way to run another country at a distance. We're going to need to put boots on the ground, and those boots might start out with diplomatic boots. We may reopen an embassy or have diplomatic personnel there. If we do that, we're going to need security for that personnel. If we do that, we're going to need more security for the security. And pretty soon, you've got a major presence in the country, a country that has a lot of hostile elements, from drug gangs to regime elements to foreign powers intervening in Venezuela like Cuba and Iran and Russia, all of whom are going to want us to fail in Venezuela. So we could really see ourselves getting bogged down there. And that's the risk. Hearing the president say what he did, I think, brings a lot of muscle memory back to the Congress of a lot of the hopes and expectations about Iraq and its oil resources. We're going to pay for the remaking of that country in a democratic image. Of course, none of that materialized. And the cost was predominantly borne by our service members.
I want to ask you about this tragedy in Minnesota because so many people seem to see what they want to see in that video of the woman in her car being shot by an ICE agent. What do you see when you watch that video?
Well, I was struck by a few things. First of all, it's horrifying to watch. And to think about this 37-year-old woman drops her kid off at school, not involved in protest activity or anything, seems to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But at one point, she's waving other cars to come on past, trying to make sure that she's not in the way, although she's been pulled over. And then you see her trying to turn away from these officers, and the shots fired into the car. The wheels of the car pointed not towards the agent, but away from the agent. That's what leaps out to me from the video. Now, there needs to be a full investigation, but that full investigation needs to have at the table, with access to witnesses and evidence, the Minnesota law enforcement authorities as well. This cannot just be Kash Patel designating FBI agents that he wants to reach a certain conclusion, or Kristi Noem doing the same. Neither of those people can be trusted to run a fair investigation. So Minnesota has a right, and I think the public has a need for credible and independent investigators to be looking at this.
Very quickly, Kristi Noem says that Minnesota investigators have no jurisdiction here. Is that true?
No, it's not true. A Minnesota citizen was just killed. They have all the jurisdiction in the world to look into this. She's also called this woman a domestic terrorist without any evidence for that. She's just a reckless mouthpiece for the administration. So you can't really, sadly, believe anything that comes from her.
Well, a lot to watch in this case going forward. Senator Adam Schiff of California, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Trump on Venezuela. Our Robert Costa talked to the president about the capture of Maduro and what's next in Venezuela. What the president told him is next in our political panel. You're watching Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Let's bring in our political panel, Matt Gorman and CBS News contributor Joel Payne. Joel is a Democratic strategist and Matt is a Republican strategist. We're also joined by our own Robert Costa. And Robert, I want to start with you because you've got some breaking news. You just spoke to the President of the United States specifically about Venezuela. What did he tell you?
It's good to be with you. I spoke to President Trump today about the issue of Venezuela, and in our conversation, he began by talking about the attack, and he believes it will have real reverberations across the world in terms of setting the tone for his foreign policy, in the sense that he's willing to use executive power to take dramatic action. And he said it really will have, in his view, a cascading effect in terms of how people see the United States, how people process his own presidency. And I said, well, when you look at what you did, there's talk of this revival of the Monroe Doctrine, of American might and power in the hemisphere, and of America really taking many bigger steps to try to exert itself in the region. And I said, do you see yourself as following some kind of ideological framework, a so-called Trump doctrine? And it was notable to me that in our conversation, the president pushed back against any characterization that he is following a so-called doctrine. He said instead what he's doing is reacting to the drug trade. He said, quote, if there's any doctrine, it is really about me stopping drugs coming into this country. If you're bringing drugs into the United States, then you're against what the United States is for. And this is a classic example of how President Trump operates on both domestic and foreign policy. As much as so many people around him, allies and critics, want to define him as nationalist or populist or say he's the reincarnation of President Monroe, he is someone who, when it comes to negotiations politically and diplomatically, wants to have much more room to maneuver. So you see in his interactions with heads of state, whether it's the head of Colombia or in his warnings to the Cuban leaders, there's strong language, but there's also a possibility that he could change his posture. And that makes him hard to track ideologically, and he revealed that in our conversation.
Right, he's definitely keeping the entire world guessing, especially when it comes to what he's been saying about Greenland. Matt, I want to ask you about this because the president was not happy when 5 Senate Republicans voted today to basically try to constrain his power to strike again in Venezuela. These are Republicans who held off before. Now they are jumping on board. He lashed out at them. He said that they should be replaced and that they were stupid. That doesn't come as a surprise, I'm sure. So why were they willing to buck him?
Well, I think a couple things. I don't think he cares at all about the Monroe Doctrine. You think you're right. The drugs are part of it. I think it's also China and Russia. I think that was the geopolitical play there. They're willing to buck him, I think, for several reasons. Some of them are Lisa Murkowski and Todd Young, who's retiring. The one I took note of was Susan Collins. And I think everybody was done favors by that criticism. Certainly Susan Collins has an in-kind contribution to her campaign, the deep blue state of Maine. But also one of the most notable things, but to your point, Robert, that I took away from his press conference, but also what you were talking about just now, is it's all a big deal, he said, in terms of like transactions. So he might be mad at Susan Collins and Josh Hawley now. The next vote comes, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. I want to turn to the other big story of the day, which is Minnesota, and ask you all about the administration's strategy here. They are coming out swinging at this woman who was killed yesterday. They've called her a domestic terrorist. They have said she's a left-wing radical. President Trump called her a professional agitator. This investigation is 24 hours old. I don't think we have an indication yet that any of those things are true. Why are they going after her without waiting to see what the investigation says, Joel?
It's a good question. I'm probably not the best person to ask to translate what's going on in the Trump White House. It does seem, and this is a part of that conversation that you and Matt and Bob were just having, strength feels like a thing that Donald Trump wants to show off. He wants to show it off internationally. He wants to show it off domestically. I think the other side of that for him is that this is not what people asked for. People did not ask for protesters who are peacefully protesting in their community to be fired upon. This is a woman who, by all intents and purposes, it seems like she was dropping off or picking up her child from somewhere in the Minneapolis area. When you talk about Venezuela, it's wholly inconsistent, the actions that he took. Again, not what people sent him to Washington to do. So it's interesting that Donald Trump and his allies have defined the purpose of his presidency this way. That is not what the American people who sent him to Washington, that's not what they wanted him to do. And that's what the big disruption is for me.
It does seem, Matt, like focusing so heavily on this woman is a way to try to draw attention away from another debate about the wisdom of sending so many ICE officers into one city all at once.
The way I took it was they were not going to let this story be defined by whether it was Democrats or any of the media. Thank God there was camera footage where people saw that this woman looked like went after the officer, was already interfering with law enforcement procedure, tried to go after him by hitting the gas. And it was a terrible situation. It was awful all around. But I think they were not going to let the narrative be overwhelmed without going in first. I think that in many ways, they learned many of these lessons from the first Trump presidency to go on offense, to show that strength, rather than let it envelop them.
I think Republicans and Donald Trump risk the American people thinking they're gaslighting them. And I respect Matt a lot. If anyone can watch that video and think that that woman deserved lethal force to be shot in the face, all of us have been involved in picking up and dropping off a child or been involved in protest. There is absolutely no justification for it. But more importantly, it doesn't matter actually what Matt or myself thinks. What do the American people who are watching think? What he's doing in Venezuela is not aging well. It's not starting off well. It's actually starting off worse than other similar situations internationally has in recent history. And I actually think that what he's doing domestically with going after people in their communities based on this immigration rage strategy they have, that's also not going well. And it matters what the American people think, and it's not aging well right now.
With the little time we have left, Robert, it is the Trump playbook to come out swinging and deal with any potential fallout later.
If you step back, what we're also seeing here is the implementation of what President Trump has been doing since day one of this term. There's been a use of executive power and a use of federal forces in American towns and cities. And so what makes this incident notable beyond the specifics of what unfolded on the street, it's not just a police incident in a town where there's maybe a question about the police action in a community or a respective city. This is the federal government through ICE, through federal forces from different agencies having this presence. And so it raises bigger questions about the broader policy of the administration. And it's not just a policing matter, it's a federal question. And as you've seen in the reaction, many Republicans support President Trump having these federal forces in American cities to implement the immigration policy. And many people are alarmed. And there is the ongoing reckoning from incident after incident.
Robert Costa, Matt Gorman, Joel Payne, thank you all so much. A really important discussion. Appreciate it. Up next, wrapping up week one, we're going to take a deep dive into New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's first days in office. Is he following through from his breakout campaign? You're watching The Takeout. We'll be right back. Today marks exactly 1 week since Zohran Mamdani was sworn in as New York City's mayor. Today, alongside Governor Kathy Hochul, he rolled out a plan that includes free childcare for 2-year-olds in New York City. Jason Bieferman joins me now to talk about it. He covers New York politics for Politico. Hi, Jason. So good to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Mamdani promised an affordable New York, and now he is unveiling this new proposal. Walk us through it.
Well, what Mamdani is proposing, and it's pretty much guaranteed now that the governor says she's on board, is that by the end of his term, every child from 2 years old up to kindergarten is going to have free childcare. It's going to be available to every city resident. And as he said today, this is something he promised on the campaign trail. And we see Governor Kathy Hochul is fully on board. This is a big win for him, and it's only day 8 of his administration.
How much is that going to cost, and who are they going to hire to watch all these kids, and where?
Well, that will be done by the New York City school system. That they will be overseeing that. He's also hired someone to manage the entire childcare program. And the governor was already committing billions of dollars to this program. But because Mamdani, that this has been such a big part of his campaign, there's going to be an additional $1.7 billion from the state government. And she's already committed to funding this program next year as well. So we don't expect this to disappear next year. This is going to be a long-term thing.
Okay, that'll be interesting. Another big thing he did this week, he scrapped a series of executive orders that had been issued by his predecessor, including one to combat anti-Semitism. Can you describe for us in about the next minute or so what the mayor's relationship looks like with the Jewish community now?
Well, there's so many things you could say on that topic, but what I will say is that Zoran Mamdani has made strides to really connect with the Jewish community. He's hosted, Jewish leaders from the Orthodox backgrounds all the way to Reform backgrounds, and it's not always been successful. There's still a large faction of the Jewish community here that is opposed to Mamdani, that views his failure to recognize Israel as a Jewish state as a threat to Jewish people here in New York City. New York City is home to more Jews than any other city in the country. And this is going to be a problem for Zoran throughout the remainder of his term. It's only day 8, but he's already seen friction here. What he did in that executive order, he repealed an executive order that that recognized a definition of anti-Semitism, which included a boycotting of Israel as anti-Semitic. And he said it's not anti-Semitic to boycott Israel, basically was his point.
Jason Bieferman of Politico, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Making the case for something sweet. Up next, a doctor joins us to share the lessons from his new book on living a long and healthy life. You're watching The Takeout. Eat more ice cream isn't typically thought of as good health advice, but that's how Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel frames it in his new book on aging and living a healthy life. Earlier, I spoke with him about eating well and about the Trump administration's recent overhaul of public health. Eat your ice cream. It's like, don't tell me twice.
Exactly.
Why did you decide to make that the title of your book?
Because wellness should not be about self-denial, punishment. It's really about, you're going to live a long life. You have to have pleasure. And if you're going to stick to things that make it long and healthy, they have to be things you like doing, not things that you dread going to do. So,
we're surrounded by all this advice now on social media, online, drink, don't drink. It's okay to have coffee, don't have a lot of coffee. You've got all these wellness influencers who are, giving you all kinds of advice that seems like good advice, but you never really know. Is that why you decided to write this book and kind of lay it all out?
That is actually a major reason. I would get lots of questions exactly about this. It says this on this website. It says that on the other website. What am I supposed to do? And I recently got one of those questions actually from my daughter, which is, they changed the vaccine schedule. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So I did want to cut through that. I wanted to actually make 3 quick points with the book. One was, don't obsess about wellness. You can't make it the focus of your life. You have lots of other important things to do. Second, it is too complicated. Everyone is making it complicated. This additive or this micronutrient. And no, that's not it. Okay, focus on the big picture. And the last is they oversimplify all at the same time, which is they only talk about food, exercise, and sleep as if that was all of wellness. And we know that there's a lot more to wellness, and that other stuff like social engagements, having friends and family, having them over for dinner, and keeping your mind sharp, those are way more important than the food, exercise, and sleep in terms of health and longevity.
Social engagement, why is that so important?
Because you're human. And as Aristotle said, by nature, we are social animals. That's what our forebrain is all about, right? Navigating social connections. Man isn't the strongest animal around. Man isn't the fastest animal around. Why did we succeed? Because we can work together and collaborate and have participation with other people. So our brain actually changes when we have social interactions.
So that means eating dinner with other people.
Really important. Very, very high on my list of wellness activities, actually. Calling and talking to family, friends, just acquaintances. Going into a cafe and talking to the barista is really, really important for us. It changes our brain. People say, oh, it's just psychological. No, it's not psychological. You get a squeeze of oxytocin in the brain, that love hormone. You get dopamine and serotonin release. You also get a down regulation of your cortisol and stress hormones. So the body changes in response to social interaction, and it's very good for you.
You brought up vaccines, and one of the things I enjoyed the most in your book was one of the sections was just don't be a schmuck.
Yes.
Don't smoke, don't vape, don't do self-destructive things. And you said don't avoid vaccines. I thought that was interesting that you said that specifically. Just this week, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., talked about a major change to CDC guidelines when it comes to vaccines, rolling back recommendations that all kids get vaccinated for half a dozen vaccines. I asked him about that yesterday. I want to play a little bit for you about his justification and then get your take on it in a second.
Great.
Take a listen. Here's the promise that you made to Congress when you were going through your confirmation process. You said, I will support the CDC vaccine schedule when I get in there. Isn't this a violation of your promise?
No, this is the CDC vaccine schedule, and I am supporting it.
So, but I don't think that that's what senators took you to mean, that you would go ahead and change it.
Well, of course I'm going to change it if the president asked us to look at what the European countries were doing, which have much less chronic disease than we do, and to find out what the best practices were there and to implement them.
What's your take on that this was based upon the best science?
He's being too clever by half. You fire all of the ACIP, that's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and put on a lot of vaccine skeptics. And then you say we're following the best science. When you don't release the science, you're actually following, and you don't consult the ACIP, and instead you consult the FDA head and the head of the NIH, which are never consulted on these recommendations. This is just nonsense. He's making up a story that bears no relationship to reality. Now, if he released the science, we would look, and he said, look, we're going to where Denmark is. That is total nonsense. They have 11 vaccines instead of 17 for young infants and children. Canada, by the way, has 16, just to give you a reference point. Almost all countries are closer to 15 or 16, not to 11. Denmark is totally different from us. 2% of our population, 6 million people. Universal health care coverage. No copays when you take a kid in to see the doctor or get treated. You have nurses that actually follow these children to make sure they get their vaccines. Very different healthcare system compared to the United States. And him to say we're following the best science and what European countries are doing and handpick one country that is so different from us, this just bears no relationship to reality. The fact is, since the 1950s, when we developed the polio vaccine and then the measles vaccine, mumps, chickenpox, and all the other vaccines we have, the rates of illnesses from those have gone down. The rates of hospitalizations have gone down. These vaccines are tested in tens of thousands of people. They are super safe, and the mortality rates have gone to almost negligible. It is safer to take a vaccine than have a peanut allergy in this country. He is just wrong about vaccines.
Dr. Zeke Emanuel, thank you so much for that insight. Thank you so much for Eat Your Ice Cream, which is available for order now. It's a really fun read. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Happy Thursday, everyone. This is The Takeout. The Daily Report is coming up next.